Hello everyone, I'm Ron Grant coming to you live and direct from Tortola in the Virgin Islands. You're watching 284 Media. Thank you for your time. Premier of the Virgin Islands has called upon the people of the Virgin Islands to voice their opinions on the matter of same-sex marriage while stressing that legislators should be obligated to heed the wishes of the populace. A referendum has been considered by Wheatley as a means to fortify the BVI's position against potentially forced legalization of same-sex marriage within the territory. Now, the news of the referendum first surfaced in December of 2022 when Premier Wheatley addressed the public regarding an ongoing legal decision before the High Court. The case involves a same-sex couple, both Virgin Islanders, who were married abroad and subsequently sought legal recognition of their union within the BVI. Now, on the matter of a referendum, we pan across the region to Bermuda to take a look at their referendum on same-sex marriage, which was held in 2016. Joining me to share the experiences of Bermuda in this regard is Cordell W. Riley. Cordell is the Institutional Research and Planning Coordinator at Bermuda College, a position he has held for some 9 years. He is also Managing Director of Profiles of Bermuda, a company he founded in 1998. Now, the firm conducts human resource assessment, training and development, as well as market business and tourism research. Cordell, a former government statistician, has authored numerous articles in race relations, education, and, well, is the tourism and human resources field, and has spoken at a number of international and local conferences. Cordell was formerly a member of Antioch's adjunct faculty, lecturing in research methodologies and program evaluation in the Van Loan School of Graduate and Professional Studies. Of course, he is weighing in on the referendum and the process over in Bermuda, which took place in 2016. We'll be right back after a quick commercial break.
The wait is over! CCT Fire is here! Experience ultra-fast downloads, seamless streaming, and even more reliable connectivity on an all-new fire-blazing super-fast CCT Fiber network. CCT Fire, bring it home and upgrade today.
Welcome back, everyone, and thank you so much for sticking with us. As promised, I'm joined by Mr. Cordell W. Riley out of Bermuda, who will be sharing, of course, the experiences of Bermuda in their referendum on same-sex marriage, which was held in 2016. Mr. Riley, welcome to our studios, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.
You're most welcome. I want to begin, of course, with recapping. In 2016, the referendum on same-sex unions was held in Bermuda. What is interesting about that is it caused quite a stir. Just recap for us what took place on the front of the referendum in 2016 in Bermuda.
Well, the issue of same-sex marriage had kept coming up, and the government wasn't sure how to move in this area. Some of the government MPs were in favor of same-sex marriage, but I think the majority were against it. So the government decided to go ahead by referendum. And as you pointed out, the referendum was held in 2016, and there were two questions. So the referendum, there was an order for referendum, and basically there were two questions in the referendum. Are you in favor of same-sex marriage, and are you in favor of same-sex unions? And the answer was yes or no. And after the referendum order was established, then there are regulations that go behind that. And the regulation stated that in order for it to be valid, not binding, but valid, there had to be 50% of the voter turnout, and at least 51% of those must favor one or the other. So that's kind of the background. And the results at the end of the day were basically 68% were against same-sex marriage, and 61 or 62% were against same-sex unions.
Wonderful. Now, as a result of the findings, what then happened as it pertains to the decision to allow for same-sex unions or marriages within Bermuda? What was the next step?
So there was some internal, so there was a change of government, and then there was a internal wrangling within the NAX ruling government, where a MP was going to put a bill through the House that stated that marriage was only between a man and a woman. And so the minister at the time, Minister, I think, Walton Brown, who's responsible for this area, had several town hall meetings, and of course, there was the issue was quite emotive. So he had a compromise that he will introduce a bill for domestic partnerships, and that marriage will be reserved for a man and a woman. And so the bill went through, I think, in 2017, and then just as you mentioned earlier, that was challenged by a same-sex couple. So they went to the registrar to try to get married, and the registrar turned them down. And so they brought on a court case, and the court ruled in the first instance that they had a legal right to marry under the current laws. The government then challenged that at the Court of Appeal and lost there. The Court of Appeal sided with the lower court, and then the government vowed that, and I think when the election was coming up, the government vowed that it will, in fact, take it all the way to the Privy Council. And the government did take it to the Privy Council. So the government decided that it was going to, as it promised the voters, take it all the way to the Privy Council. And it laid out its case, hired QCs to fight the case for it, and laid the case before the Privy Council. And so, as you know, it takes a while before it comes back. And so it came back, I believe it was last year. The Privy Council ruled in the government's favor that its domestic partnership bill was not unconstitutional, and it was by a 4-1 margin of the Privy Council. That shocked a lot of people who were in favor of same-sex marriage, because they thought it was going to be a slam dunk, having had 2 victories in the lower courts. But the Privy Council ruled by a 4-1 margin that the domestic partnership bill was in fact legal, and the government won its case. And of course, the Privy Council is the final arbiter in any laws with regards to Bermuda. So that's how it panned out. Now, if you were to search this on the internet, you will see lots of titles, a lot of headlines stating that Bermuda is the first country to repeal same-sex marriage. That is a total fabrication, because what actually happened, there is no bill that permitted same-sex marriage. What happened was it was challenged, the current laws were challenged, and the judges ruled that same-sex marriage was in fact legal. The government challenged that, and the government won its course. So to say that Bermuda has repealed, or the first country in the world to repeal same-sex marriage, is a total fabrication.
Understood. Well, I'm happy that you, of course, brought up the issue of the same-sex couple of challenging it, because it is, like I mentioned, the very same here in the Virgin Islands. So they got essentially 2 wins, and then once they went to the Privy Council, the government won in favor. Now, I want to go to the Referendum Same-Sex Relationships Act of 2016, which was passed in Bermuda. Now, prior to this, was there a act specific to the referendum?
On same-sex marriage? No, there was nothing prior to this.
Okay, so this act was, Referendum Act 2016, was essentially brought before the House in particular to this case. Now, when you look at the Referendum Act, where it is, of course, a number of findings, the Queen's Most Excellent Majesty, and by the advice of the consent of the Senate and the House of Assembly of Bermuda, by the authority, had a number of findings. I want to break this act down, Cordell, for persons who are not privy to it. Tell us about the details of the Referendum Same-Sex Act of 2016.
Well, the Referendum Act. So again, if you look at the act itself, it's very a basic document. I don't think it's very
Correct.
long at all, and
2 pages.
it was very simplistic. It was simply saying the government is going to bring forward a referendum on same-sex marriage, and there were 2 questions, as I pointed out. Are you in favor of same-sex marriage? And the second question was, are you in favor of same-sex unions? And that was it. So a writ was filed for the date of the election, as you pointed out, in June 2016. And there was a huge campaign in Bermuda as a result of that. There's a group that emerged, it was called Preserve Marriage, that was encouraging voters to vote no, no. And then you have groups that supported it that was urging their supporters to vote yes, yes. So there was a huge campaign that took place after the writ was given for the referendum. And then, of course, everything on the day happened. As I mentioned earlier with you, that I was actually, as a justice of the peace, I was actually in charge of the Western District. So normally there would be 36 constituencies, but because it was a single issue, they combined the constituencies to East, West, and Central. And I was in charge of the Western division of the same-sex referendum. And so people came, and it was a simple process. You have your normal ID as you would for voting, and you only had the one question to, or the two questions to answer to. And after that, you put your ballot in. So you're in and out in a matter of seconds at the polls. But it was steady. But I think if you look at it, one of the critics of it was that turnout compared to an election was lower, and the results were not, as the government said, valid. We had, I think it was like 47% voter turnout, and it would needed 50% to be valid. But that in reality had no real meaning, because that doesn't mean it was binding. But I think the impact of that, though, laid heavily on senators when they went to because that took place before the Domestic Partnership Act of 2017, the government had enough votes in the House to pass it, but because the Senate had 3 independent senators and 3 opposition senators, and the government only had 5, there was a lot of lobbying among the senators, the independent senators, to vote against it. But the senators joined with the government. I'm not sure of all of them, but only one of them really needed to get the 6 to 5 votes. But the Senate, in fact, went with the government on the issue and upheld the domestic partnership union. And I think they did that because the will of the people. The people voted 2/3 against it, and I think that was perhaps driving the Senate. If you wanted to get the will of the people, even though it was not valid, you had, 47% of voter turnout, and I think that was a significant amount. You're talking about more than 20,000 people voting. So it was, I think that could have been on the Senate's mind when you have such a large turnout and such a strong a voice among the people.
Understood. I'm happy that you mentioned the fact that essentially the referendum has no binding, because I do believe that locally across the Virgin Islands there is a misconception that persons somehow feel that a referendum, whether it is in support or against, whatever the ruling is by the residents, will have some sort of effect on the present same-sex marriage case that is before the High Court. And it is important to highlight that the referendum really has no binding, and it will not affect a judge's ruling in any way. A referendum is particularly to allow the people of the Virgin Islands, or any country rather, to voice their concerns, whether they would support a cause or not. I have to ask you, has there been since any referendums on any other topics, whether it be legalization of marijuana or decriminalization, whether it be any other matters? Has a referendum come up since this 2016 referendum in Bermuda?
No. There has been discussions within the House with regards to legalize or decriminalization of marijuana, but that was done through a normal bill, and the one that went through that allowed for the production of cannabis in Bermuda was not signed by the governor. representing the Queen. But there has not been a referendum on any issue since.
Understood. Now, Cordell, before we go, I want you to speak to the people of the Virgin Islands. Of course, the matter of having a referendum is only in its initial stages. We recently had our election earlier this year. So essentially, the people of the Virgin Islands would have to go back to the polls to voice their take on same-sex marriage or same-sex unions. Like you mentioned in 2016 for this referendum, our election voter turnout, voter apathy was quite low in our most recent general elections. What would you say to the people of the Virgin Islands as it pertains to them participating in the overall referendum process if we are to be able to get to that point?
My advice would be to go out and to let your voice be heard. I think either one way or the other. If you want, if this thing goes further than where it is now, if you want your voice to be heard, this is the opportunity to do it. Because I firmly believe that is what swayed the Senate. I don't know if it had any bearing on the Privy Council, but I do believe it swayed the Senate in passing that domestic partnership bill. And I think from a legal standpoint, they look at points of law. But I think it's hard to ignore the will of the people, and certainly even the European Court of Human Rights said that they cannot impose their will on member states. And I think the Domestic Partnership Act, even though I don't think we're any longer under the European Court of Human Rights, it certainly satisfies the dictates of the European Court of Human Rights. So the best thing to do is to go out there to let your voice be known, and so those results, whether or not they're valid or binding, at least you would have something that can be referred to. And I certainly believe that large voice was in Bermuda's stead. It ended up in a good stead in terms of it having some bearing. Even though the referendum itself was declared not valid, I think it had certain weight in the process.
Wonderful. I want to thank you so much for your time, Cordell, and of course, bringing light to the referendum process, and of course, comparing, based on the experiences of Bermuda, what we could possibly expect in this process of a referendum in the Virgin Islands. Thank you so much for connecting the region through conversations. Have a beautiful rest of the day. Viewers, that's all the time we have. Have a beautiful rest of the day. Bye-bye.